I reject my humanity, Jojo. This is the declaration that Dio Brando, the villain of Hirohiko Araki's manga masterpiece, JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, shouts when he becomes a vampire. It's a line that is often quoted and mocked. It's also a quote representative of Dio as a character. It's a proud display of perceived superiority. It's a threat to his foster brother Jonathan Joestar, the hero who Dio opposes. More than anything, it is an acceptance of his role as the villain of the story and as an archetypical vampire. By that, I mean to say that the moment of Dio's transformation is more than just an anime power-up. It's a moment of revelation and completion. This is because, while in a literal sense, Dio doesn't become a vampire until this moment in chapter 11 of the manga, or episode 3 of the anime, in a thematic sense, he's been a vampire since his introduction. For Dio represents vampirism beyond the literal vampire traits, and he operates as a much more disturbing type of vampire, the type of vampire that anybody could be. When considering Dio as this type of universal vampire, we need to think about what vampires are, past the literal. In Thomas C. Foster's Introduction to Literary Analysis primer, How to Read Literature Like a Professor, he writes on vampires for a chapter. This chapter tackles the idea of literary vampires. The vampires he has in mind are more than just coffin and bat motifs. Literary vampirism is about other things than literal vampirism. What other things are they about? Foster says, selfishness, exploitation, and a refusal to respect the autonomy of other people. He even goes as far to state that ghosts and vampires are never only about ghosts and vampires, implying that any good supernatural story reveals a bit more human horror. Foster discusses the use of blood-sucking as a thematic extension of exploitation. These vampires drain their victims of hope, happiness, and self. His chapter uses Bram Stoker's Count Dracula as the prime example of a character that is both a literal and literary vampire, putting Dio in good company. Now, I'd go as far to argue that Foster's core description of vampires fits Dio as well or better than it does Dracula. Dio's selfishness, exploitation, and refusal to respect the autonomy of other people is the element that is the most striking about the early moments of Phantom Blood. In his inner monologues in the first chapter of Phantom Blood, Dio declares his intentions to milk the Joestar nobles for all they're worth, and psychologically torture Jonathan to the brink and take his place. This blend of sadism and gleefully parasitic behavior could easily be described as blood-sucking. Another significant example is the moment which springs Jonathan into his heroic action, the assault of Jonathan's love, Erina Pendleton. The scene is a brutal example of Dio refusing to respect the autonomy of other people. It also features a young, kind woman as the victim, a recurring element in Dracula and in vampire fiction in general. These examples and the intimacy in which Dio commits them creates the sense that Dio was at his most vampiric before he became a literal one. The archetypical vampire is traditionally old enough to be outdated, representing the horrors of the past and its institutions, yet wealthy enough to maintain those institutions. Dracula is, again, a good example. He's an elderly-looking member of the aristocracy in an antiquated country who is softly implied to be an ancient warlord from centuries past. Foster discusses the archaic nature of vampires as being a depiction of the concept of the old leeching on the young, the ancient preventing the progress of the youthful. Now, this trait doesn't fit the petulant, boyish Dio Brando of Phantom Blood, but let's consider a different iteration of Dio, the Dio of the third part of JoJo's Stardust Crusaders. This Dio is much closer to being a vampire of the old and the archaic. Phantom Blood hero Jonathan's descendants, the Joestars of Stardust Crusaders, see Dio as a century-old demonic figure from an antiquated culture who murdered the patriarch that they never knew. This treatment of Dio as a threat from the past is not a far cry from the antiquity of Count Dracula and the implications it presents. A significant aspect of literary vampirism is the alluring, the tempting. Representing the temptation of sin itself, vampires are often attractive, with the female vampires of Stoker's Dracula being strong female examples. In fact, this is such a popular element of vampire fiction that it is often made the main, or only, element present in modern entries. The Dio we see in Stardust Crusaders is a man who thrives on the control he holds over others. It's not a particularly forceful control either, with a couple of exceptions, such as the flesh buds placed in Polnareff and Kakyoin's head in The Death of Enyaba. We are never really given the impression that Dio is being particularly dishonest with his followers. Vanilla Ice's willingness to sacrifice his own life is a good example of such clear understanding. This new Dio is defined and driven forward by his charisma. This is highlighted repeatedly by the story's protagonists feeling, and some falling for, the temptation to serve him. Joseph Joestar even explicitly comments on Dio's charisma early on in Stardust Crusaders, arguing that it might be his greatest power. Now, is all of this to imply that Araki was trying to form Dio as a culmination of vampiric tropes? No, not at all. There are a lot of archetypical vampire traits that don't fit Dio. Most vampire stories, for example, focus heavily on the vampire being a foreigner, which isn't a very important distinction in the internationally minded JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. Now, I don't believe that Dio was intentionally designed to be the epitome of a vampire, but I'm not sure that the intention matters here. Dio represents the true terror of vampires, the concept that any single person with fantastic intelligence, ability, or charisma would make it their goal to hurt others as brutally and as thoroughly as possible. What's your favorite literary vampire in anime? What are some literary tropes in other JoJo characters? Let me know in the comments below. I'm Lysander VK, and I hope you stay clear of vampires.